If you want to follow along with it, go ahead and go to Slack, and I give a link to let's call it a tutorial that we're going to go through, but effectively it's a very small game that introduces a lot of the core concepts of Unity quickly, so we can start focusing on building our dungeon. So this is something that I've used for a while. That's why it's actually based on an older version of Unity. So I'll probably have to do a couple of like real-time translations into what's the current equivalent to what they're talking about, but it should be pretty close. It's not we're not talking about 10 years ago Unity. We're talking about like 1 year ago Unity type thing. All right. So for starters, hopefully everybody got Unity downloaded and installed on their computer. If you didn't and you want to get that going in the background, I think it's Unity, is it unity.org? Unity.com. So you can go to unity.com, click on download Unity, and then you can either download for Windows if you're on a Windows machine, or download other versions, and you can choose Mac or Linux. So go ahead and get that on your computer. What I am using, just so you're using the exact same version as I am, is I have installed Unity editor version 2021.3.19F1. That is not the absolute newest version of Unity, but it is the newest fully supported version of Unity from bug updates, yada, yada, yada. If you go to official releases here, I think I actually have to call in install editor. If you do install editor and you look at official releases, it is the newest version with what's called long-term support, LTS. So it should be relatively bug-free, as opposed to some of these newer versions that actually these aren't even in beta. They're just not long-term support yet. And actually interesting, they have one that's made specifically for Apple Silicon processors, which is what my new computer here is running. They also have pre-release versions from 2023. This is the latest, greatest, whatever beta. But for us, so everybody's on a consistent version of Unity, I want you to install the newest long-term support version, which is 2021.3.19. Okay, I happen to have mine installed for Apple Silicon because that is what my processor and my computer is. Most of you, I would assume, are probably on Intel. And that would have been the default. It wouldn't install the Mac Silicon one if you aren't running that. Okay. So get that downloading in the background if that isn't something you've already done. All right, so now let's go back. So we're going to look at this tutorial called Rollaball, which is actually going to be kind of similar to our dungeon crawler from a getting stuff working perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to play this video, and I'm going to try to go full screen with it, and I want to make sure you can see and hear it. So I'm going to stop it after about 5 seconds, and you tell somebody, yell out whether you can see it and you can hear it. So is that showing up for everyone? If somebody has to unmute and scream.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Right, so you can hear it, see it?
Welcome.
All right. So I'll go ahead and play this, and we'll watch this. I'll actually keep this one at normal speed, but I'll probably speed up some of the other ones since I'm going to be demoing it as we're doing it and making some real-time translations, but just to kind of take us through it. So this is going to show you the ultimate end product we're going to be trying to create. And again, the link to this tutorial is on Slack.
Welcome to the Rollable project. In this beginner project, You're going to make a very simple but playable game using many fundamental game development concepts. In your rollerball game, the player will control a ball rolling around the game board using the power of physics. Your game will use player input from the keyboard to apply forces to the ball and move it around the game environment. It will also detect contact between the ball and other objects in the game so they can be collected. When the player has collected all the objects, the player wins. In this learning project, you'll use the Unity editor and its built-in capabilities to set up a simple game environment. Write your own custom scripts to create the game functionality. Create a basic user interface to make the game feel more engaging. Build your game so other people can play it. You won't need to import any assets for this project. You'll just need to use Unity version 2019.3 or higher. That's it. You'll create everything else you need in the Unity editor. If you don't already have Unity downloaded, go to the Unity Hub to get ready. First, you'll complete the Setting Up the Game project. Let's get started.
All right. So that's ultimately what we're going to be building, is a thing that has basically a boxed in arena with a ball that's going to roll around that you can control with your keyboard, and you can run into these things and effectively collect the little box diamondy thingies, whatever. All right. So we want to start off now. I'm going to be kicking up the speed for some of these videos, just so because I'm going to be doing some translation. So what I did is I clicked on the setting up the game thing, and this is going to be creating our Unity project. Let's see, I think it's down. Yeah, here's our create new Unity project. And so even right away, this is going to have a little bit of a difference in it.
Hello. Okay, first things first. In this video, you'll learn how to create a new Unity project. Let's get started. First, open your Unity Hub. Select the account icon and log in with your Unity account. If it shows your initials, you're already logged in. Select Projects and then New to open the New Project window. At this point, you can choose from a range of different templates for your Unity project. First, select Universal Render Pipeline for this Unity project. The Universal Render Pipeline, or URP, lets you quickly and easily create optimized graphics across a range of platforms, from mobile to high-end consoles and PCs. In the project name field, call this project Rollerball.
All right, so I'm going to stop it right here because this is already an area where it's going to be slightly different. So if you go back over to Unity, so if we've launched Unity here, and so actually I'm in Unity Hub is the application I'm in, which has your installed editors and stuff, but I'm going to be under projects here. I'm going to click on new project. All right, so notice that already this doesn't have the exact same things that the other one had. So if you scroll down, here's the 3D URP, Universal Render Pipeline. So this creates a blank template that is kind of usable on all sorts of different things. You can also come up and just choose a 3D core, which is uses Unity's built-in renderer if you'd like. I'll go ahead and do the universal pipeline. This is a template that you have to download. So I'll go ahead and I guess download that real quick. I doubt it's very big. All right, so already got it. All right, and I think this gives you kind of a starting point for an app just so you can kind of see some stuff. And we're going to call this guy Rollerball. I think is what they wanted us to call it. All right, and we'll create that project. All right, it might take a second for this guy to load. I'll go ahead and play the video a little bit more to get us to the end point of this.
Next, in the location field, set the destination or file path to the new project. Finally, select Create to make your project. It will open in the Unity editor. Don't worry if this takes a little time to load, especially if this is the first time you've opened a project in the editor. Now that you've created the Unity project for your game, in the next video, you'll set up the workspace in the editor.
All right. So this guy is still cooking a little bit. It's the first time that I've run Unity on this computer. Looks like it's cooking here. So while that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and go to this next thing to let it start playing. So a little bit slower on this one.
Before you begin to create your game, you need to set up your workspace and create a new scene.
All right, so notice here, I'm assuming ours will be the same. It already started us off with kind of a sample workspace. Let's see if that's the case here. It looks like it is. Oh. Yeah, so this is our sample scene. Doesn't actually look like there's anything in there like there was in their version. I'm going to check it. Just hit play here. Yeah, there actually isn't anything in their version of this. All right, but in the one from the video, they're showing that there's kind of a starting point that gets put in there. So let me see. All right, so we'll let this keep cooking, but effectively what she's going to have us do is move all these old folder things into some sort of like old template folder so we can kind of start from scratch for our project.
In the top right of the Unity window, you will find a drop-down menu labeled Layout. A layout is a collection of stored positions of the tabs in Unity. These tutorials use the default layout,
So over here, let's see, why can't I hide this? That, okay. I have some stuff on my screen that maybe you're not seeing, but is blocking me. So what we're looking at right here is the default Unity editor. Don't worry about all this other stuff yet. We'll be dealing with it as we get to it. But the thing she just references up here in the top right corner, and I think we're probably already in the default layout. If you click on where it says layout and there's a drop down, we're going to be using the default layout for Unity. And we already were in that. Once you get used to using Unity, you might decide that, oh, I want to mess around. You can create custom layouts in here. Really what it is, it's a difference between where your components of your scene are, which is what's going to be over here on the left, your inspector, where you get to change things for individual components over here on the right, your assets and the console down here, and your actual play area or design area up here. You can move those things around to areas where you think it's more helpful. A common thing people do is they will move the this particular box over here on the left. They'll move it right next to the inspector because there are situations where you have to drag stuff between those two. And sometimes it might be a little difficult to drag it across the whole screen, but pick your poison. But we're just going to start off with the default layout.
it's easier for you to follow along, but you can change and save layouts you enjoy by using this menu. These are saved in the Unity editor settings, so you can store and use them for different projects. Now you've set a layout, you're ready to create a new scene. Scenes are ways to organize the things in your game. You can think of them as different levels. The template scene that is currently loaded showed.
Yeah, so notice that we're kind of thinking about the kind of the naming conventions for Unity. Unity calls scenes And it's okay if you're still verifying stuff in the background. You can always go back and rewatch the video later and follow along. I'm basically introducing the tool for you using the version that I've asked everybody to download, so I can show you the differences as we go. Otherwise, depending on different computer speeds, we're going to be waiting 20 minutes for different things to load and things like that. Okay, so naming conventions inside of Unity is we have this thing called a scene. So start off and let's give some definition. So Unity 3D. So this guy is a game engine. And what does it mean to be a game engine? Okay, first of all, this automates physics. So this will include gravity, collisions, let's just say, etc. A lot of stuff. Things that historically you would have had to do all the math for and say, does this pixel technically touch this other pixel? And what do we want to have happen when that occurs? All of this stuff gets done for us in a game engine. So that what we can do is we can focus on the actual logic of our game. Now, the thing it won't necessarily do for you is make your game look pretty. All right, so if you want to mess around with custom assets or you want to build your own textures and things like that, hey, have at it. That is not something I'm skilled at, so it's not something we're going to do in class. But so we're going to have a whole lot of primitive objects like little rolly balls and cubes and things like that kind of dancing around on the screen. And you want your guy to look cooler than that with some animation stuff, because Unity also handles the animation. You can create, 5 or 6 different poses for your dungeon player or something like that. And you can have it as he's walking around, have him move between those poses. Unity has an animation editor, and you'll find that there's lots and lots and lots of tutorials out there for working with Unity. The one thing you just need to pay attention to is which version of Unity that tutorial was made for, because sometimes they're a little bit outdated and sometimes there might be a slight change in the current version versus what's in the tutorial. I haven't seen in a while drastic enough changes where you can't pull off what the tutorial says to do for most of these tutorials. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just be prepared that sometimes what you see on the tutorial will not be identical to what's on the screen, but it should be similar-ish. All right. So a game engine automates physics. It also allows us to associate scripts. So this is our code with the game objects to make our game work. So one of the things we're going to be doing after we've learned this tool initially is we are going to be bringing in our dungeon crawler, the code we've already written with some modification, but we're going to bring that in and have that essentially govern what we see on the screen. So if our guy moves from one room to another on the screen, we're going to update that behind the scene in our dungeon so we can keep track of what actually is what. And that's a technique that a lot of modern games kind of use. All right, but this is the part where we get to associate code that we write for unique behaviors for our guys with visual game objects we see on the screen. Unity lets us do all that. All right, let's just say it allows you to do some other things too, and we can let that organically grow, but we'll just leave this slide at this for right now. The first thing that it kind of introduces here is this idea of something called a scene. Okay, so a screen, a scene you can think of as like a level in your game. Now, that doesn't mean that you always have to have more than one level, more than one scene for your game. But as an example, when you launch a video game, when you get to that very first screen where you're picking like 1 player, 2 player, whatever it is, that first screen would be a scene. And then once you click on 1 player game and it goes to another screen, that would be a second scene, for example. All right. Our games are probably going to be a single scene. Maybe we might do 2 scenes if we want to have kind of you know, when we run into a room that has when our player runs into a rat, for example, runs into Mr. Gonzalez or Dr. Lockley or something like that, maybe that transitions to a fight scene where, you know, the battle actually goes back and forth between the two of them. For any of you who've ever played one of the old school Final Fantasy games, this is kind of what you'd see if you go back and watch videos of original Final Fantasy on Nintendo. Your guy is running around on a map. That would be one big scene. And then when he runs into an enemy, it just pops up to a brand new scene with your guys on the right, the monsters on the left. And then there's this back and forth interface until somebody dies. And then once the fight's over, people's hit points and stuff are adjusted, then it comes back to the normal scene to keep playing the game, keep walking around the map. All right, so that's the idea of these scenes. This is a level of the game. Basically, every screen of your game will have its own scene. There is some school of thought where, and you will see this in some typically older Unity things, where, and you're going to see here in a few minutes, you can make the world scale very, very, very large. Some of you who are gamers, you might have heard of a type of game called an open world game. And a lot of times these games have some gigantic map that your guy can run around on, and it might take, you know, 10 or 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is, for your guy to move from one side of the map to the other side of the map. Now, modern games, since our graphics cards and computers have so much memory, things like that, we've seen some games where all that movement happens without any cutscenes or any delays. If you've been in some games that are maybe a little bit older or require a little bit higher performance, what you might have is the map of the world looks like it's gigantic, but as your guy is moving from, let's say, you know, west to east, he might get to a place where he's getting ready to enter the mountain range or something. And when he does that, he passes some certain place, it actually loads the next scene that is the area of the map that is the mountain range. So sometimes you'll have one gigantic scene with everything that is in your large world or whatever showing up there. Other ones might have individual scenes for a room. Okay, we'll explore both options for how we want our dungeon to work, going from screen to screen to screen. All right, and we'll make some decisions there, how we traverse through our dungeon. All right, so that's what a scene is, and we're going to keep introducing things as we start doing this. Is in a couple minutes we're going to be looking at something called a game object. So we'll just let her keep cooking here.
Showcases some of the basic features of URP. Feel free to explore it before you create your own. To create a new scene in the editor, in the top menu, go to File, New Scene. Before you save.
All right, so let me go back here, open up our Unity. So right now we have this universal render thing, we have tutorial settings, we have our scene, and we have this thing called sample scene. Just to keep up with what she's kind of doing, I'm just going to create a template. I'm sorry, I'm going to create a folder. Where is my folder? Maybe I'm not going to do that.
It's at the very top.
Very top. Oh, where it says folder? Is that the place? All right. So we'll call this guy template, whatever. And then I'm just going to basically drop all this crap into this template folder. I think I can leave. Well, I don't think it matters if I leave this guy outside or not, but I'll leave it outside. All right. So basically down here is your directory, if you will, for your game. So I just put all that stuff they initially give us into this initial template folder just to match what she's going to be doing on the screen there. And we're going to go up to File, New Scene. And this is going to bring a new scene into our game. So we can create a basic scene. Let's see if she picks a specific one of these scenes.
Let's create a new template folder within the assets directory and move all of the existing assets.
Just see if she picked a certain kind of scene.
Before you save, let's create a new template folder within the assets directory and move all of the Feel free to explore it before you create your own. To create a new scene in the editor, in the top menu, go to File, New Scene. Before you save.
All right, so it doesn't look like there is so we can choose the basic built-in scene because it looks like her scene already comes with, if you look over here on the left, the main camera and the light. The main camera is going to be effectively the thing that your user will see when they hit play for their game. So if I come back over here, I'm going to choose this basic built-in new scene. So I'll hit create there. So it just created our untitled scene here. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and hit file, save as, and we'll call this roll a ball scene. And the default location for it is in the assets folder. So we're just going to see it pop up down here. All right. If I wanted to keep things separate, because one of the things she's going to harp on is the idea of having like all your scenes in one folder, all your scripts in another folder, and so on. That probably makes pretty good sense. So if you right click here, go to create, put in a folder, we'll call this folder scenes. And then we'll drag our scene we just created into there. That probably makes pretty good sense, even though our initial game here is going to be very tiny and we're not going to have a whole lot of, in fact, we're only going to have one scene. Okay, not the end of the world. I'm going to put this down here. I think that might be better. All right, because shortly we're going to have scripts as well. So we'll probably create a folder for our scripts.
Dave, let's create a new template folder within the assets directory and move all of the existing asset folders there.
All right, I've already done that stuff.
Next, scenes. Let's call the scene minigame. In the project window, you can now see the scenes folder, and inside that, the scene called minigame. Now that you've set up your scene, in the next video, you'll start creating the play area for your game.
All right, so let me talk about our scene just a little bit here. So now that we've created this scene, notice up here in the upper left under this thing called hierarchy, we have something called roll a ball scene. Okay, so this is the new scene we just created. And notice this guy comes with two things that are already part of the scene. We have something called main camera, and the main camera is wherever he's pointing, that's what your game will see. So sometimes you want the main camera to move with your player. For example, if you think about these open world games where as you're moving through the world, you're kind of your view on the screen is kind of like over your player's shoulder. Okay, effectively what happens is that camera is following your player. Think of it as almost like a drone with the camera recording turned on. All right, but our current setting here for this guy is the camera's just standalone. It's plopped down in the middle of the scene. It's basically at the very middle of the scene here. We'll be talking about the transform here in a few minutes, but it's the very middle of the scene. And then it's just kind of up in the air a little bit, and it's angled. Let's see, is it angled down? It's actually not rotated at all. That's fine. All right. And then the other thing we have is this directional light. So if I zoom out a little bit here, you can zoom just by scrolling on your trackpad on your computer, or probably using the little wheel if you have that kind of mouse. All right, so these are the two things that are in there. When I click on main camera over here on the left, notice it gives me a little preview of what the camera is currently looking at on the bottom right here. Now, we don't have anything in our scene except light. So as of right now, you can kind of assume that we kind of have like the sun in the sky and we're looking out into an ocean of nothingness. All right, so that's what we see here is an ocean of nothingness. And if I were to run our game here, that's what we see. All right, we have a camera pointing and not moving, and there's nothing out there, but it is lit up. All right, so I guess let there be light. All right. So that's our starting point for our scene. Now we want to start putting things into our scene. So they're going to have us add some ground. You remember back from the original video we looked at for rolling ball here, we're going to have this sphere that's going to be rolling around on a surface somewhere. So we're going to build the ground. And just before we get into that, if I come over here to the hierarchy area and I right click, notice we can create all sorts of different things over here. So one of the things we're going to create is under 3D objects, we're going to create a plane. All right, and I'll do it along with what she's doing, but our sphere is going to be our rolly ball. So we're going to also have a sphere put into our scene. Okay. So let's go to the next. So we're going to create a primitive plane here. Again, I'm speeding up the
Now,
video a little
let's
bit.
get started and create a game board or playfield. You're going to do this by using a primitive plane. Primitives are simple pieces of geometry which come bundled with the Unity editor. They can be useful for creating simple prototypes without the need of an artist. Planes are two-dimensional surfaces. In this case, you'll be using a plane as the ground for your game. All objects in your scene are game objects, including the plane. To create a plane game object, either go to the menu and select Game Object, 3D Object, Plane, or you can go to the hierarchy and use the Create menu. Next, rename your plane game object Ground.
All right, so let me stop it there. So actually there's 3 ways you can create it. I didn't do either of the 2 she introduced. So you can, with the hierarchy clicked, you can go to game object and you can create any of these things. This is the same thing you saw a second ago. Or you can hit the little plus sign here and create one of those guys here. Or you can do what I usually do and I right click in here and I go to 3D object. And then I'm going to click on plane. All right, so that puts a new guy there. Now you can either rename that over here in the inspector. So the inspector allows you to work with whatever object you currently have selected. So if I change this to be the directional light, notice that my inspector has now changed and I'm dealing with the directional light. If I click on the camera, now it's dealing with the camera. If I click on the plane, now one thing is sometimes especially when you get a whole bunch of stuff in your scene, it might be difficult to click on an individual thing out in here. And this is going to be kind of a skill you're going to have to practice on how to manipulate the scene. We're going to be looking at this perspective thing up in the upper right here to see which axis we're looking at and things like that. So we can look straight down on our board from the y-axis. We can look directly along the x-axis. We can be on the z-axis. Let's see. Can I reset it? Oh, I need to unclick that. All right, well. Okay, get it like this. I had to right click and drag a little bit. So this is going to be kind of a skill you'll have to learn for how to manipulate our little 3D world thing here. Okay, from a view perspective. So be prepared to be a little frustrated at first until you start learning how to work with this this interface here. Sometimes what you might do is you might say, I'm going to look straight down on it, and then I'll well, my I'm not helping myself here. Let's go on X. I backed up a little bit. I'm just going to recreate my plane just so we have the initial view. So there's our initial view. It looks like we are on the X and then slightly elevated just so we can see what we're looking at. All right, now this is going to be the ground of our game. So we can either change that over here in our inspector, or you can rename it over here on the left. So if I rename it over here on the left and press enter, notice it also changes over here. So doesn't matter which way you do it. You don't even need to rename it if you don't want to, but you probably don't want to have, as you start building out your scene and you have 20 game objects in there, you probably don't want to have 11 of them named plane, plane 1, plane 2, plane 3. might start becoming difficult to keep track of what's what. So typically give your variable names that are meaningful. All right. So we'll let her keep cooking here.
You can do this by either selecting the game object and using the Enter key to allow editing, or by the title box in the inspector. Type in the new name and press Enter or Return to confirm this change. Then, select the vertical ellipsis menu in the upper right and reset the transform component. This will place the game object at the location of 0, 0, 0.
All right, so let's talk about this transform thing here. So this is a pretty important piece. I'm going to go back to our notes here. So let's just add a thing here for game object. So game object, this is something that we see in our scene. Note that some game objects are empty or have their renderer turn off, so we don't actually see it, but it is part of the visual components in our scene. All right, so game objects are the objects that make up our scene. All right, now we have a thing called a transform. Now, everything we've talked about at this point really isn't even a programming thing. It's a user interface thing, right? We've already learned a bunch of basic programming stuff. Now we're saying, okay, I want to build a scene. I want to build an interface for my game, my application, whatever it is. Now, we're doing this as a 3D thing. So, our plane is a 3D object. Our sphere is going to be a 3D object. So now each of these things is governed by a transform. All right, so a transform, let's see what the chat says. So Caleb, I mean, you're gonna have to mess with it some, but the first thing you could try to do is just click in the middle in this upper right hand corner. Click on the middle of this guy, and that sometimes will reset, or you could mess around with clicking on some of these things that are not the X, Y, and Z. And that might get you a different view. Let's see, if you double click on main, what did I do there? I think if you double click on main camera like this, and then you hit the Y, or is it the X? No, didn't do it either. All right, so if you click on the ground, if you click on an object and then you change the way you're viewing it, and then you double click it, it'll move it to the center of your screen. So this just comes down to practice with messing with the interface. It's not going to be convenient at first, but you'll get the hang of it, and then it won't be that bad. All right, so a transform deals with three different things. It deals with location, rotation, and scale. So where is this on the X, Y, Z plane? How is this rotated on the X, Y, Z plane? And rotations, I'm going to put a little thing. So rotations are done in something called quaternions. Spell that right? Let's just assume maybe. Quaternions. All right. So it's a mappy thing. or how to handle rotations in radians, but it's something that Unity has built into it for doing the math, and we'll kind of mess with that some. All right, scale. This is how big is the game object relative to its default. All right, so if we go back to our ground initially, so make sure you have your ground selected, because notice that every single one of these game objects, so here's our camera has a transform, our directional light has a transform, and our ground has a transform. So the most generic game object, so for instance, if we want to think about like what is equivalent to object in Java, if I come over here and I say I want to create an empty game object, so I just created this game object. This is as generic as a game object gets. And I click on it, notice that all he is a transform. All right, so from our perspective, the least capable game object only has a location of rotation and scale. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that guy here. We'll go back to our ground. All right, so initially, I think what she said is reset the position of your plane. It put your plane at some place. So you can hit this little 3-dot thing here, I guess, and hit reset, and that'll turn it to 0, 0, 0. Or you could have just come in here and typed in 0, 0, 0. That's fine too. Okay. The other thing you can also do is you can drag it around. So if you are in the center thing and you want to move it up and down on the y-axis, you can find this little green arrow. See, Y is the green guy, and click on the green guy, move him up and down, you know, wherever. You want to move on the X, the red one. You want to move it on the Z, the blue one. That'll move it closer or farther away because we are dealing with 3D space. Okay, and again, over time, you'll get better and better and better at dealing with this inside of the I guess editor here. I'm not an expert at messing around with the 3D space and stuff, but I mean, I can get by. But if you end up being a full-time game developer or something like that, you will get quite skilled with this, and Unity is considered to have a very good editor that this stuff works well for. And it's very similar to Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine would be like a direct competitor with Unity. Okay, now just to throw another thing out here right now, if you see this area over here, we're working with the move tool for its location. We can also click here and change the rotation. So now it kind of creates this sphere thing, so we can rotate it on X, Y, or Z. Similarly, we can click on the scale tool, and now we can make it bigger or smaller on these different things. And I think she demos it a little bit. I don't know what the heck that guy's for. The rectangle tool. I guess that allows you to kind of change the shape of it. And what's this dude? Just the transform tool gives you all of the ninja moves all in a single confusing interface. Realistically, you probably want to just deal with one of these at a time, or just work with the numbers over here. All right, because if I want to like change the position on Y, I can also come over here and just hover my mouse over where the Y is on position, and then I can drag left and right on there to kind of move it around. And that's sort of equivalent to me dragging on this green arrow here. But we're going to go ahead and put it at 0, 0, 0, where she has us start off, just because. Right. Get back into this.
In your scene. This is known as the origin point of the world, and this is where all of the coordinates in the scene are calculated from. Cool, right? Make sure the ground game object is selected and the cursor is over your scene view. Then press F to see the entire game object in the scene view. You can also select frame selected in the edit menu.
Yeah, I want to try something here real quick. What happens when I press F? So if I screw around with this I make it a, you know, a worse. Go with that. I click ground and I press F. Does that no, doesn't really reset it. All right. Well, I thought that was going to be a little helpful, but whatever. It didn't. All right. So we'll let her keep cooking.
In the scene, you can now see grid lines indicating a plane on the y-axis. You can use the grid settings menu at the top of the scene view to change the axis and opacity. Next, you'll configure the plane for your game.
All right. So what she's about to get into is creating a larger playing field, because right now our scale is 1 by 1 by 1, which isn't the end of the world. But once we get a sphere on here, so for example, if I go ahead and I right click over here and I create a sphere, and then I move that guy up here a little bit, you know, notice that the size relative to our sphere isn't that big. You know, we would have to move around. You know, we don't have that much space to move around on here. So we might want to go ahead and stretch out our scale a little bit. You know, you can do that by switching to the scale tool and stretching it out this way, stretching it out. Oop. Did I grab the wrong thing? Oh, the Y is its height and a plane is completely flat. That's why it didn't make a difference. So the X is how, let's say, wide it is. The Z is how deep it is. The Y is how tall it is. But since it's a plane, it is 1 pixel. So we can just have that at 1. And now that plane exists. And we've gone ahead and we've, let's just make it 3 by 3. I don't know what she'll end up making it, but that's what I made it. All right. Now, if I click on my main camera here right now, you see my main camera is it currently sees the sphere. So if I go ahead and I hit play, we'll see that we have a plane and we have a sphere. And you actually see that somewhere up here, we have our directional light and it's lighting the scene. And notice that now we have a shadow associated with our sphere. So Unity is doing all this magic for us so that we don't have to. We don't have to deal with how light refracts off of certain things and stuff like that. There are all sorts of stuff that you could mess with that I don't know about, with you know, how reflective textures are and stuff like that to try to get things to look as real as possible. This is kind of like when you play different video games, sometimes water looks more or less realistic than it does in other games. Water is actually really tough because in order to make really realistic looking water that has some motion to it, takes up a whole lot of graphics power to do that. So that's why in the older games, water was just blue. That's how you knew it was water. You just had a light blue color. Don't go there because that's water. Okay. So I'm going to pause it here for now. I'm going to keep going through this on class on Friday, but if you want to get ahead and start messing with this, we're just going to keep trucking through the same tutorial. I'm just going to be introducing things as part of Unity as we go. So feel free to move ahead if you want, but I'm going to still go through it and explain things to introduce Unity. One thing I will throw out there now, I think I mentioned it in class last week, and we'll talk more about it next week. We are going to do our midterm exam next Friday. So 9 days from today. So that's right before break starts when things are still fresh in your mind. That exam will not have any Unity stuff on it. So the midterm exam will only be the Java stuff up through what we covered as of the end of last class. All right, so if you wanted to start studying for it, that kind of stuff, remind me at the beginning of next class. I'll tell you a little bit more about the format, but if you were in my class last semester, it's the identical format. 10 questions, all short answer, essay, programming, no true, false, no multiple choice. But in any case, that'll be next Friday, right before we leave for spring break. And we will talk about that next class, and we'll review for it next week. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes? Okay, so I will see everybody on Friday, and we should be back in person on Friday. I don't think I'll have a plumber or anything. All right, everybody take care.
Have a good one, Mr. Lippman.
All right, take care.